He didn't say a word as the officer tightened the handcuffs. Not when his face was shoved into the hood of his own car. Not even when his neighbor's phone camera hovered inches from his cheek, recording him like an animal who had wandered where he didn't belong. But when the little white boy across the street, the same one Clarence had once saved from choking on a grape during a neighborhood barbecue, pointed at him and asked, "Mom, why are they arresting the scary man?" That's when something deep inside Clarence quietly snapped. Like a floorboard giving way after years of pressure, the cuffs dug in tighter with every beat of his heart. His shirt clung to his back, soaked from the pool he'd just been swimming in, and the humid air pressed down on him like guilt he didn't earn. The concrete beneath his knees was still warm from the afternoon sun, but all he felt was the chill of being watched, not with concern, not even with anger, but with pleasure. Karen stood at the edge of her manicured lawn, sunglasses perched high on her nose, holding her wine glass like a trophy. She'd won. She had called, and they had come. Because he looked out of place in a neighborhood he had paid full price to live in. Clarence didn't shout, didn't beg. He'd done that before, years ago, to a judge who didn't care, to a hospital receptionist who let his wife sit in pain for 6 hours before anyone even called her name. He'd long since learned that shouting only made them write you off faster. So he waited, quiet and burning, while the rookie officer called in his license plate. The same plate Clarence had personalized after retiring. C. Rucker, clear as day. But the cop wasn't reading it. He was staring at Clarence's face, like he was matching a mugshot in his head. When the call finally came back, confirmed name, confirmed address, no warrants, the silence that followed was louder than any siren. The cuffs came off slowly, awkwardly, like the officer was trying to unwrite what had just happened, but nothing about it could be undone. Not the bruises on his wrists, not the whispering neighbors, not the way his daughter would look at him when she found out. There was no apology, no handshake, no eye contact. Just a muttered, "You're free to go," as if Clarence was the one who had inconvenienced them. He didn't move for a while, just sat there, still kneeling, as if getting up would mean accepting that this was his life now. A man stripped of dignity in his own yard, accused by a woman who'd once asked him to carry her groceries inside when her husband was out of town. She hadn't looked twice at him then. But today, shirtless, in the pool his wife had begged him to build before she died, she saw something different. A threat, a problem, a black man where she didn't want one. Clarence stood up slowly, the old pain in his knees flaring again. He was 62, and some days his body felt more like 70. But this ache wasn't from age. It was from something deeper, something older than him. The ache of being seen only through the lens of someone else's fear. The ache of being judged not for his actions, but for his existence. He looked at the pool behind him, the surface now still, reflecting a sky that had no answers. His wife, Marlene, had loved that pool. She used to sit on the edge with her feet in the water, head tilted to the sky, telling him stories about heaven like she'd already been there. It was her dream, that backyard, that house, that peaceful retirement they'd planned together. But cancer didn't care about plans. And after she died, all Clarence had left was this place, this sanctuary. until today. Until someone decided even that was too much for a man like him. Inside, the house was too quiet. The TV was still playing the jazz documentary he'd started earlier, but the sound felt distant, hollow. He sat down on the couch, staring at his shaking hands. The skin around his wrists was raw where the metal had bitten in. He tried to breathe, slow and deep, like the therapist used to teach. But the air didn't go down right. It stuck in his chest, thick and bitter. He didn't cry, not because he didn't want to, but because the tears wouldn't come. Dade. Dried up years ago, when Marlene was first diagnosed, when they lost their baby girl at birth, when the department forced him into retirement after budget cuts. He had learned to carry pain like it was part of his uniform. But today, it didn't feel like pain. It felt like betrayal. From the country he served, from the neighbors he greeted every morning, from the world that looked at his face and saw threat instead of a man. His phone buzzed, a text from his daughter, Layla. "Hey Daddy, just checking in. You good?" He stared at it for a long time, then turned the phone over and placed it face down on the table. He couldn't lie to her, and he couldn't tell her the truth either. Not yet, not like this. The next morning, the neighborhood was silent. Again, sprinklers ticked across perfect lawns. Dogs barked faintly in the distance. And Clarence stood at his kitchen window, watching the woman next door pretend not to see him. She wore the same sunglasses, held the same glass of wine, even though it was only 10 in the morning. He wondered if she felt powerful, if she slept well last night, if she'd told her friends she made the neighborhood safer. He stepped outside and walked toward the pool. The sun was rising, casting golden light across the water, but all he saw was yesterday. The badge he'd once worn felt like a distant memory, a different life, a different man. They hadn't even recognized him. Not one of the officers, not even Officer Neil, who he had trained from day one. Neil had stood there, with his arms crossed, face blank, while the cuffs clicked shut around the man who had once taught him how to shoot straight and never let fear do the talking. Clarence sat on the poolside bench and rested his elbows on his knees. A long breath escaped his lips, but it didn't lighten anything inside him. The injustice wasn't new. He had seen it, lived it, fought against it. But being on the receiving end, in his own home, in front of his neighbors, made it hit different. Made it personal in a way that no courtroom testimony or community outreach ever had. He reached down and touched the water, letting it ripple through his fingers. This was supposed to be peace. This was supposed to be Marlene's gift, her way of telling him to keep living. But now, even this place had been contaminated by suspicion, by fear, by the casual cruelty of someone who had nothing to lose and too much privilege to see the damage she'd done. And still, he hadn't snapped. Not yet, but something had shifted, quietly, irreversibly, because a man can swallow only so much silence before it starts to poison him from the inside. The days that followed moved slowly, like thick syrup dripping down a wall. Clarence didn't turn on the news. He didn't answer the door. The pool sat still, untouched, the water losing its shimmer under layers of fallen leaves. Once his haven, now it felt like a trap, a reminder of what had been taken, of how quickly a man's world could turn hostile, even in silence. The neighbors went on, pretending nothing had happened. Lawnmowers roared every Saturday morning. Mailboxes clicked open and shut. Children played in the cul-de-sac. But no one looked him in the eye anymore. No one waved. The same people who used to nod at him during evening walks now busied themselves with phones whenever he passed. He had become the shadow they didn't want to see, the man who had been humiliated publicly, and therefore deserved to disappear quietly. At the grocery store, the cashier who once asked about his barbecue ribs and laughed at his corny jokes suddenly became brisk, mechanical. A woman in line behind him clutched her purse closer when he turned around. It wasn't the incident itself. Most hadn't even seen it. But word travels fast in places where smiles are fake and silence carries weight. They all knew, or thought they did. Clarence avoided going outside when he could. Every glance felt like judgment. Every silence felt loaded. The home he built with Marlene now felt like a museum of lost intentions. Her photos were still everywhere, on the mantel, beside the bed, in the hallway where her laughter used to echo, but they only deepened his sense of absence. She would have known what to say. She always did. But now, there was only the quiet sound of time dragging its feet across wooden floors. The local HOA sent him a warning letter 3 days later. Unkempt pool area, it said, violating neighborhood aesthetic standards. There was no mention of what happened. No inquiry into why he might be keeping to himself. Just a cold piece of paper signed by the board president who happened to live 2 doors down and hadn't once knocked to ask how he was doing. The cruelty wasn't loud. It was quiet, sharp, and calculated. Death by paper cuts. He started skipping breakfast, then lunch. Some days, he just sat by the front window, staring at the mailbox like he expected something different. A letter, an apology, a visit from the police chief, an anonymous note that said, "I saw what happened. I'm sorry." But nothing came. The world had swallowed the incident and moved on, leaving him behind with the weight of it. It was Layla's voice on the phone that finally broke through the fog. She called every evening now, more than usual, like she could sense her father slipping. Clarence answered with the same soft tone every time, assuring her he was fine, just tired, just resting. But even across the line, she knew better. She offered to come stay for a few days, but he deflected gently, told her to focus on her work, her own life, the baby on the way. She had enough to carry without adding him to the list. On the 6th morning, something shifted. It wasn't clarity or peace. It was numbness. A soft, dull ache that filled his chest and made even grief feel distant. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror, stared at the lines around his eyes, the silver creeping into his beard. He used to smile at his reflection, make little jokes about his age. The man staring back at him looked like a stranger, someone who had once been proud, respected, maybe even loved, but now just existed. The mail that day brought another envelope, this one from the local community center. It was a flyer. Veterans Barbecue Night, open to all. Come share stories. Clarence chuckled bitterly. He'd been invited to speak at those events before, back when the department still returned his calls, back when his badge still meant something. Now, the invite felt like a ghost, a reminder of a door that had closed without sound. But tucked inside the flyer was something else, a small, handwritten note in shaky penmanship. Mr. Rucker, I don't know if you remember me. My name's Miguel. You helped me with my traffic stop last year. You told me I had value when nobody else did. I saw the video online. I just wanted to say thank you. You matter. Still do. Clarence reread the note 3 times. It wasn't long. It wasn't perfect. But it felt like oxygen in a room that had been sealed too long. Miguel had been a scared kid, barely 20, pulled over with a busted taillight and fear in his eyes. Clarence had stayed calm that day, had walked him through the process, told him not all cops were enemies, told him to believe he could do better. He remembered that call now, the shaky hands on the wheel, the way the boy had said thank you like it was the only word he had left. That tiny note didn't erase what had happened. It didn't undo the arrest, the stares, the ache. But it planted something inside Clarence. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something like breath. He tucked the paper inside his wallet, behind the photo of Marlene, where it rested like a promise he wasn't sure he deserved, but quietly wanted to believe in. Later that evening, he heard a knock at the door. Not loud, not urgent, just a soft, uncertain tap. He opened it slowly, half expecting another letter, another reminder of his fall. But instead, it was a boy, maybe 10, maybe 11. Skinny, freckled, with scuffed sneakers and a chocolate-stained hoodie. He looked up at Clarence nervously, holding something in his hands. My mom said I had to bring this back, the boy mumbled. He held out a towel, one of Clarence's, from the pool. His name was stitched in faded thread across the edge, the same towel he had lent the boy last summer, when he had slipped near the pool and scratched his knee. The same boy who had called him the scary man last week. Clarence took the towel without speaking. The boy lingered for a moment, looking like he wanted to say more, but didn't know how. Then he turned and ran back down the steps. Clarence stood in the doorway, the towel in his hands like a relic, something old and warm and slightly damp. With apology, he didn't cry. Not yet. But something loosened in his chest, just slightly. The night came slow, and Clarence sat outside for the first time since the incident. The pool still shimmered under the porch light, quiet and blue. Thought of Marlene, of how she used to hum to herself while folding towels on the patio. He thought of Miguel's note, of the boy's silent return. The world hadn't changed. The shame still lived in his bones. The silence still wrapped around him like a heavy coat. But somewhere beneath it all, the faintest pulse of something else began to stir. Not joy, not recovery, but the barest outline of purpose. And that ... was the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. Clarence didn't sleep much that night. His body begged for rest, but his mind wouldn't let go of that boy's eyes. Wide, nervous, but honest. And Miguel's note, it sat like a soft echo in his pocket, reminding him that not every chapter had ended. Something in him stirred, faint but persistent, like the first twitch of a limb that had gone numb for too long. The next morning came with no intention, no plan. He brewed coffee out of habit, drank it black. The quiet pressed in again. The walls still echoed too much. But his hands didn't shake the way they had the day before. It was nothing heroic, just 1 degree of difference. But he noticed later that afternoon, while taking the trash out, he saw her, Mrs. Abner, from 3 doors down. An older woman, widowed, always in her garden. She was kneeling by her roses, fighting the weeds like they owed her money. He paused, almost out of instinct. Normally, he would have waved. Today, he hesitated. But before he could turn away, she glanced up. Her eyes met his for just a second. Not long enough for a greeting. Not warm. But not cruel, either. She didn't look through him like the others had. She looked at him. Clarence gave a tiny nod. She didn't return it, but she didn't look away either. When he turned back toward the house, he felt something small and strange behind his ribs. Not comfort, but friction. Life pushing back just a little. That evening, the flyer from the community center reappeared in his hands. He wasn't sure why. He had no intention of going. He hadn't seen half those people in years, and the ones he had, most had long since learned to pretend he didn't exist. But something about Miguel's note made the words, "Come share stories," feel personal. As if someone, somewhere, might actually be waiting for his voice. He didn't decide to go, not really. He just found himself dressing in something decent. Jeans that didn't sag. A shirt that still held Marlene's favorite scent. He looked in the mirror again, and for a moment, he imagined her teasing him about his choice of cologne. He could almost hear her laugh, the way she used to say, "Boy, you smell like you're going to a job interview, not a barbecue." That memory carried him further than he expected. By 6:15, he was in his truck. At 6:40, he was parked outside the community center. But stepping out? That was the hard part. He sat behind the wheel for 10 minutes, gripping it so tightly that the skin along his knuckles paled. He wasn't scared of confrontation. He'd faced armed men in alleyways, broken up street fights with nothing but his voice. But this, walking into a room full of people who might pretend not to see him, this was the kind of battle no badge ever trained him for. Eventually, not quickly, not confidently, just enough to push the door open and step inside. The smell of grilled meat and cornbread hit him first. Then the noise, casual chatter, slow music, the scraping of chairs. He kept his head down, drifting toward the back. There were maybe 40 people. A few wore veteran caps. A few were his age. He didn't recognize most of them. That made it easier in a way. He found a seat in the corner, near the window, and sat. No one approached. But no one asked him to leave either. The event went on. People shared stories. Some were funny, some were heavy. One man talked about losing his best friend to PTSD. Another woman described her struggle with civilian life after years overseas. Each voice landed like a soft thud in Clarence's chest, a reminder that pain, while personal, was never entirely unique. Then the host, a lanky guy with a kind voice, invited anyone else to speak. A few heads turned toward Clarence, probably out of curiosity more than expectation. He nearly shook his head, but something lifted his hand. Maybe it was muscle memory. Maybe it was grief. Whatever it was, it moved him forward. He stood slowly, walked to the front, cleared his throat. The mic was too close. and his first words came out too sharp. He adjusted, leaned in gently, and began. I'm Clarence Rucker. I served in the Army a long time ago. Then I joined the force. 32 years in uniform, 19 of those training rookies, helping kids, trying to make things better than I found them. I had a wife, Marlene. She was everything good about my life. She's gone now, and lately, I've been off the map. Some of you might have seen the news. Some of you might have judged. I don't blame you. But what I want to say is, I'm still here, and I'm trying to figure out what that means. The room was quiet, not cold, just still, the kind of quiet that listens. Clarence didn't remember the rest of what he said. It came in a rush, not like a speech, but like an unraveling. He spoke about the pool incident, about the weight of suspicion, about the silence that followed. He didn't cry. His voice broke once when he mentioned Marlene's laugh, but he kept going like someone trying to walk on a healing leg. When he finished, there was no applause, just a few nods, a few eyes that held us a little longer than before. It wasn't a welcome party, but it wasn't rejection. It was something new, something in between. After the event, a woman approached him. She was in her 60s, soft face, gray curls, tired eyes. She said she remembered his name. Her brother had once mentioned him. Clarence braced for judgment, but she just said, "Thank you for showing up." Not everyone has the guts. He nodded. Didn't say much, but something in him relaxed, like the first breath after coming up from deep water. The drive home felt different. Not lighter, exactly, but less jagged. The world hadn't changed, but maybe, just maybe, it had noticed him again. That night, he sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The wind rustled gently through the trees. The pool still reflected the sky, silent and blue. He thought about what healing meant, not erasure, not pretending, but maybe learning to hold the pain without letting it hold you. Clarence wasn't fixed, but for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel broken beyond repair, and that felt like a beginning. The following weeks unfolded like cautious steps on cracked ice. Clarence didn't rush anything. He didn't chase redemption or force connection, but he started moving slowly, deliberately in the direction of life. He returned to the community center a few more times, not to speak, not at first, just to sit in the back and listen. The stories softened something in him, made the silence at home feel less like punishment. He began tidying up the house again. Little things. Fixing that one screen door Marlene always hated. He even dusted off an old folding chair and placed it near the pool, facing the sunset. It gave him something to do, somewhere to sit when he couldn't sleep. Every evening, he'd find himself there, tea in hand, watching the sky change color, letting memory float without pulling him under. Miguel came by once, on a Sunday afternoon. He didn't stay long, just handed Clarence a small tray of tamales his mother had made, muttered something about gratitude, then took off. But it mattered. That short visit felt like a knot untangling, one thread of connection, no strings attached. Clarence didn't try to analyze it. He just accepted it. The biggest shift came when he received a letter, plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a simple note from a law firm. It said a defamation case filed by his attorney. 1. Clarence barely remembered agreeing to, had been quietly settled. The news station that ran the false narrative about the pool incident had admitted to publishing unverified claims. They'd agreed to retract the story, issue a public correction, and pay damages. Nothing grand, but enough to matter. Clarence read it twice, 3 times, not out of disbelief, but out of caution. He had learned not to trust good news. Still, a warmth stirred in his chest. Not joy, not relief, but something close to the idea of fairness, like the universe had tilted just slightly toward balance. He didn't tell anyone. Not yet. He just folded the letter, placed it beside the note from Miguel, and sat in silence. That night, he slept better than he had in months. The next morning, he walked to the small park a few blocks away, the one with the mural of veterans painted across the brick wall. He stood there for a while, watching kids play, listening. 2 birds, remembering what still made life bearable. When he returned home, the world felt manageable again. Quiet, but not cruel. But hope, when it comes too early, can be fragile. 2 days later, Clarence was in the grocery store when it happened. He was reaching for a loaf of bread, something simple, something ordinary, when he heard the voice sharp, cutting, unmistakable. That's him. That's the one who pulled a gun on a woman for swimming. It froze him. The voice belonged to a man he didn't recognize. Mid-30s, phone already pointed in Clarence's direction, whispering too loudly. Another Karen. Another echo. Clarence didn't move. He wanted to explain, but he knew better. A confrontation here would become another viral moment, stripped of truth, fed to strangers who didn't care about context. He lowered the bread, turned away, walked down a different aisle. But they followed. Coward, the man muttered behind. Him, racist, with a badge. You're lucky you didn't end up in jail, old man. Clarence's hands began to tremble. Not from fear, from the pressure building behind his ribs. That old storm that never really left. His throat tightened, his pulse pounded. He left the cart where it stood and walked out of the store in the parking lot. The man shouted again. You don't belong here, you sick freak. Clarence didn't look back. He drove home, sat in the truck, and didn't go inside for nearly an hour. The silence, once a refuge, now pressed against him like a cage. Every wall felt smaller, every breath heavier. It was as if all the progress, all the softness, had been erased in a single public moment. That night, he didn't sit by the pool. He didn't brew tea. He sat in the dark, hands on his knees, staring into nothing. The retraction letter was still there, still real, but its weight felt meaningless. Paper didn't erase public shame. Truth didn't undo humiliation, he thought. About calling someone Miguel, maybe, or that woman from the community center who had nodded kindly. But shame silenced him. The kind of shame that didn't come from guilt, but from being misunderstood so thoroughly that even truth felt like a lie no one wanted to hear. He didn't cry, he didn't rage, just collapsed inward like a building long hollowed out. The next morning, he skipped his walk, left the dishes in the sink, didn't open the curtains. He moved through the day like smoke, unseen and barely solid. He didn't answer. The pool, once reflective, now seemed like a mirror he no longer wanted to face. On the 3rd night, the dam finally broke. It wasn't triggered by anything dramatic, just a photo, a picture, of Marlene, taken 10 years ago, holding a plate of ribs and laughing in the kitchen. She was wearing a ridiculous apron that said, "Queen of Everything." Clarence stared at it for a long time. Then the tears came, sudden, choking, years overdue. He slid to the floor, picture clutched to his chest, and sobbed. Not just for her, not just for the incident, but for everything that had been taken, his name, his dignity, the quiet trust of his neighbors, the purpose that once held him upright. In that moment, everything hurt. And yet, something essential returned. Not strength, not clarity, just presence. Real, raw presence. Clarence hadn't truly grieved before. He had carried the pain, yes, but tonight he let it break him. Not to destroy, but to release. Hours passed. The room remained dim, but inside him, something settled. A quiet truth, heavy and undeniable. He couldn't control what others believed. He couldn't rewrite what had been said, filmed, or shared. But he could choose what kind of man he wanted to be from this point forward. Broken, yes, but honest. He stood eventually, washed his face, folded the photo back into the drawer. Then he sat on the porch again. The pool shimmered faintly in the moonlight. The night air didn't comfort him, but it didn't crush him either. The collapse hadn't erased him. It had revealed him. And in that quiet space of ruin, Clarence felt the beginning of something truer than vindication, the need to live. Not to prove anything, but simply because he still could. It began with the smallest shift. Clarence started unlocking the front gate again. Not for anyone in particular, just for the air to move more freely through the house. The gesture felt symbolic somehow, as if he were letting life in again, even if it stung, even if it made him feel exposed. He didn't speak to anyone for a while. Not out of bitterness, just quiet, necessary quiet. But in that silence, he began to observe more. The elderly woman who passed by his fence each morning with her noisy walker, its boy on the corner, who always wore the same oversized hoodie, earphones plugged in, even when it rained. The world hadn't stopped. It had just kept turning while he had gone still. One morning, it was trimming hedges when he noticed a car stalled in front of his neighbor's driveway. A young man, early 20s, maybe stood beside it, frustrated, pacing with his hands on his hips. Clarence hesitated. Normally, he wouldn't interfere. People didn't always welcome help from an old black man in a quiet neighborhood. But something tugged at him. Maybe it was the boy's helpless expression. Maybe it was the fact that no one else stopped. He wiped his hands, walked over slowly, and offered a simple question. "You need a hand?" The young man flinched at first, eyes guarded, then he softened. "Yeah, battery's dead, I think." "Jumper cables." Clarence nodded and retrieved them from his garage. 15 minutes later, the car rumbled back to life. The young man smiled sheepishly, extended a hand. "Name's Jordan." "Appreciate it, sir." Clarence shook it. "No problem. Drive safe." The exchange was brief, ordinary, but it left something behind. The way Jordan had looked at him with reluctant gratitude. The way Clarence had felt afterward, not proud, not heroic, but useful, and usefulness, after long isolation, felt like light filtering through a thick cloud. He began walking again. Not to get anywhere, just to move. He nodded at familiar faces, Some nodded back, others didn't. It didn't matter. He wasn't looking for apology anymore. He was looking for peace. One day, as he passed the community center, he heard music. Coming from inside, soft piano notes, clumsy but earnest. He peeked in. There was a little girl sitting at the instrument, maybe 10 years old, hitting each key with delicate uncertainty. Her mother sat nearby, watching closely. Clarence lingered. A moment, then moved on. But the next day he returned. Sat in the back again. The same girl was playing, improving bit by bit. Her mother looked up at Clarence and smiled this time. A small, tired smile. He returned it. Later that week, one of the center's staff, a middle-aged woman named Tanya, approached him gently. "You ever think about speaking at one of the sessions?" Clarence chuckled, shaking his head. "Not my thing." Tanya nodded. "I figured, but people listen to experience more than advice. And I think your voice might mean something." He didn't answer right away, but the seed had been planted. That night, Clarence sat by the pool with a notebook. He didn't know why he opened it. He wasn't a writer, but words had been circling his mind for weeks. Half thoughts, jagged memories, things he hadn't said aloud in years. So he began writing. Not a speech, not a letter, just fragments of himself. About his first day in uniform. About how he once helped a child who reminded him of his nephew. About the time Marlene made him dance in the kitchen to old jazz music, and how he'd fought her on it, then laughed like a boy when she pulled him in anyway. He wrote about the incident. Not just what happened, but what it took from him. How it stripped away his name, how it twisted the truth into something cruel, and how long it had taken to stop feeling ashamed of something he didn't do. He didn't write to be understood. He wrote to remember who he'd been before the noise. A few days later, he returned to the center, sat in the front this time. Tanya handed him a mic, but he didn't use it. Just stood and began speaking. Low, slow, steady. He didn't tell people how to live. He just told them what he'd lived through. "I lost more than my job that day. I lost trust. I lost neighbors. I lost the version of me I thought was safe from harm. But I also learned that healing doesn't come when people believe your side. It comes when you stop needing them too." There was no applause, just silence. Heavy, respectful silence. A few people wept. A few nodded. One man walked out too much, maybe. But Clarence didn't take it personally. Afterward, Tanya touched his shoulder. "You changed someone tonight," she whispered. Clarence shook his head softly. "Nah, I just told the truth." In the weeks that followed, more things shifted. He volunteered to fix the center's broken water heater. It took 2 days, 3 trips to the hardware store, and 1 skinned knuckle. But he did it. He showed up for the piano recital too. The little girl played her song without a single mistake. Her mother mouthed, "Thank you," across the room. Miguel came back one evening. This time not just to drop something off, but to sit. He brought 2 root beers and said nothing for a long time. They watched the pool, watched the sky turn red and purple. "You're different now," Miguel finally said. Quieter, but more real. Clarence smiled. "Life will do that to you." They didn't talk about the past. Not directly. But Miguel did say something before he left a sentence. Clarence would carry for a long time. "You didn't deserve what happened. But you're showing people how to carry it without hate. That matters more than you think. That night, Clarence returned to his notebook. He didn't write about pain. He wrote about impact. Not in grand gestures, but in the way one small action could ripple outward. A fixed heater, a shared soda, a moment of eye contact that said, "I see you." He wasn't healed. Not completely. But he was healing. And that difference between being fixed and simply growing gave him more peace than he expected. He looked at the pool, now calm and unclouded, and saw his reflection older, weathered, but still here, and that, he thought, was enough for now. It had been over a year since the day Clarence's life cracked in two, and yet some days still began with the same quiet ache, that moment between waking and remembering. But it no longer crushed him. It just sat with him, like an old scar, familiar but no longer bleeding. That Saturday morning, Clarence was trimming the tall hibiscus by the edge of the pool when he heard the voice again, sharp, entitled, unmistakable. "Is this your house?" He turned slowly. There she was, Karen, the same woman who had accused him, ruined him, and vanished behind her gated comfort while his world collapsed. She hadn't aged much, though her posture had stiffened, and her eyes darted with something that looked more like caution than arrogance. Clarence didn't speak right away. He held the shears, still in his hand, and simply stared at her. She cleared her throat, folding her arms. I was just passing by, visiting someone on this block." He gave her nothing, just silence. She looked at the ground, then back at him. Her voice was quieter now. "I wanted to say something. Actually, I've thought about it for a while." Clarence didn't invite her in, but he didn't walk away either. She took a slow step closer, her eyes softening. "Back then, I was scared, and I thought I saw something dangerous. I told myself I was protecting my kid, but I think I was protecting my ignorance," Clarence said. "You weren't scared of me. You were scared of who you thought I was." Her breath caught, but she nodded. "Yes, and that's worse." He could feel the old fire rising, the anger that had once consumed him. But it didn't roar this time. It simmered, then quieted. She wasn't here to undo the damage. No apology could do that. She had come. Karen reached into her bag and pulled out a folded envelope. "I wrote something. It's not for now, but if you want later." He didn't take it. Instead, he said, "Do you know what happened to me after you made that call?" She hesitated. "I read some of it online. Saw the backlash." The videos. Clarence stepped forward now, not aggressive, but steady. "I lost my badge. Lost people I thought were friends. I spent a year waking up with my heart racing, wondering if today would be the day someone finally told the whole story. But they never did, because it didn't matter. Your version of me was more convenient." Her eyes filled, but he didn't stop. "And even now, you stand here hoping I'll take your letter and maybe let you walk away feeling like you did something right, but I don't need your guilt. I've lived in enough of it." She nodded, voice trembling. "I know, I really do. I just needed to say it." Clarence looked down at the pool, the surface smooth and sunlit. Then back at her. "You don't get to rewrite what happened, but you can carry it. Quietly, honestly." Karen swallowed hard. "I will." He nodded once. then turned and walked back toward the hedges, shears in hand. Not dismissing her, just choosing peace over fire. Behind him, she stood still a long moment, then left. Later that night, Clarence sat by the water, the unopened envelope in his hand. He didn't know if he'd ever read it, but he didn't throw it away. He placed it gently in a drawer, not as a keepsake, but as a symbol, a scar folded into paper. The confrontation hadn't brought closure, not the kind he once craved, but it had given him something deeper. He had stood face to face with the woman who broke him, and had not broken again. He realized then that justice wasn't always about trials or headlines. Sometimes it was about standing in your truth without flinching, and letting the other person carry what they did, while you carried what you survived. And in that moment, something in Clarence's soul shifted, not healed completely, but freer, stronger, whole, in a way that didn't need to be seen to be real. There was a quietness in Clarence now that hadn't been there before, not the silence of sorrow, but the calm that comes after a storm has passed and you've found, somehow, that you're still standing. Life had not returned to what it was, but he no longer wished it would. Something gentler had grown in its place every morning. He walked the perimeter of his small yard, not because he feared trespassers anymore, but because it grounded him. Each step felt like a whisper from the earth, reminding him, you made it through. You didn't break. Word had spread over time, not through outrage, but reflection. A local teacher, who had once crossed the street to avoid him now, waved when they passed. A few neighbors, who had turned their backs after the pool incident had left, handwritten notes in his mailbox. Not grand apologies, but quiet acknowledgments, small human gestures. But they were something. Clarence had started volunteering twice a week at the youth center a few blocks over, not as a cop, not even as a mentor at first, just a man who listened. He didn't wear authority anymore. He wore patience. The kids, most of them bruised by the same systems that once chewed him up, gravitated to him. They didn't ask about the badge. They didn't care what uniform he used to wear. They cared that he saw them, really saw them. One boy, Marcus, reminded Clarence of himself at 13, angry, mistrusting, always waiting to be hurt first. Clarence saw that armor right away, so he never forced his way in, just sat with him sometimes. During art hour, gave him space to speak or stay silent. And slowly, week after week, the boy softened. One afternoon, Marcus muttered without looking up, I heard you used to be a cop. Clarence had smiled gently. I used to be a lot of things. You get fired or something? Something like that? Marcus paused, drawing dark strokes across his paper. You regret it? Clarence answered without hesitation. No, because if I hadn't lost that job, I might never have found this place. Marcus didn't reply, but he nodded once, and that was enough. At night, Clarence would sometimes sit on his porch and look out. Over the quiet neighborhood, the same streets that once judged him, now softened by time and understanding. He didn't crave anyone's forgiveness anymore. What he had now was something more sacred than public redemption. He had reclaimed his name in private. He had rebuilt his soul with his own two hands. The pool still shimmered in the backyard, a mirror of all that had passed. He kept it clean, not because he needed it to prove anything, but because it reminded him that peace, like water, needed tending. He never opened Karen's letter, but he never threw it away either. It lived in a drawer, yellowing gently with time, a symbol not of her, but of who he had become in spite of her. The wound was still there, but it no longer defined him. It was a chapter, not the whole book. One evening, as the sun melted behind the trees, Clarence stood at the edge of the pool and breathed deep. The same man, who had once been stripped of everything, stood taller now, not because the world had changed, but because he had. And for the first time in a long, long while, he didn't feel like a broken man trying to mend. He felt whole, and quietly, without fanfare, he smiled, a soft, honest smile that said, "I'm still here. I'm still good. And that's enough. That's enough."